Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Educational Warfare. I'm Dr. Jordan Lauer. Today, we're talking about the war at home with exhaustion. We're in episode 2 here. Really appreciate we're talking about all the things that we talked about, the work that brings us, that affects us and causes exhaustion. But today, we're talking about how it comes into our home. And with me is my partner, Dr. Ryan Jackson. How are you doing today, Ryan?
Hey, good morning, Dr. J. Excited here, man, to really dig in and talk about this one. This episode has got me fired up this morning. We're talking about the war at home. You know, one of the biggest arguments for educators is the kind of job that truly never stops. It never ceases. And we're going to address that today with some practical tips, strategies, of course, our opinions on how to combat these things, but very excited about this morning's episode.
Absolutely. You know, our last episode, just to kind of cover what we talked about for anybody joining us, and thank you for being here. Remember, you can email our show at educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com. In our first episode, we talked about things like the state of modern education, our workload, class sizes, losing faith in yourself because you're not feeling like you're doing a great job. We talked about politics creeping in and grooming possibly, and what students are really learning in classes. It's a great article by Peter Green of Forbes with that. We also talked about going deep on the information within our classes and how those biases can creep in and how all teachers, have a way of fighting those. We covered current students and their makeup, cell phones in the classroom, and how that can be sometimes driving that behavior. We also talked about teenage development and that allure of cell phones and why it's not exactly they're trying to do something bad. They just may be feeling that pull. And then in our mailbag episode, Ryan, I was riding solo, and dude, we had such great emails from people. We talked about our personalities and everything, and we had some really great connections. So I love you guys kind of talking to us. So anything you hear here, anything you hear in the mailbag episode, feel free to email us again. You can also find us on X at EDU Warfare. So we are just ready to talk about how all those things and all the things we talked about in episode 1 and in the mailbag can kind of come into our home, and that, like you said, that exhaustion follows us there. This job never stops.
Hey, Jordan, for the mailbag episode, man, let's just remind our listeners, the idea behind this podcast was, no platitudes, no empty rhetoric. Just none of that rose-colored glasses that does not get to the root issues we're really trying to uncover. That's not to say we're negative Nancy's. We're certainly not. In fact, I live by that learned optimism mindset. So we are here to look for those strategies, those tactics. We are here to help, but we want to hear from you, even the spicy questions. I mean, even the hard challenges, the pushback. Don't be afraid, to send us in that kind of information. I believe in that kind of mindset, that radical candor, that if you will not address it directly, then really no progress is happening. So send us all of those kind of messages. We want to hear from you directly.
Yeah, I do love that, Ryan, because we talked a little bit about this, that teachers are naturally nice. We don't like to rock the boat because what we do is a good thing. So we're sometimes afraid, again, to sound like negative Nancy's, and we never want this show to sound like that. Like, we love the profession. We love the teachers. This is about those things that sometimes we're feeling, but we're just afraid to talk about for whatever reason. Yeah, so if you have a comment that's just, it could controversial, spicy, something that maybe makes people feel a little like, ooh, that's a little weird to talk about. That's what we're here for. If we get it out, if we talk about it, if we start discussing it, that's how you alleviate some of these feelings. That's how you take the profession forward, is that we talk about issues. That's how you cause change. So I love that you're doing that. Yeah, please send us in anything that you have like that. Love to hear it. Love to talk about it. Love to discuss it. First episode, we finished up on some misconceptions teachers have. It can be new teachers or any teachers. So let's real quick, we have one that kind of filtered into home. So let's jump in real quick and talk about some of those, the last one of those misconceptions they may have that really goes to this episode, the war at home with exhaustion. So let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I see this from both sides because I also live with an educator, a 19-year teaching veteran. She teaches ELA, currently junior level English at a massive high school here in Middle Tennessee. So I see this person who's teaching English. She's done it for years. She's coming home. She's got the assignments. She's got things to grade. So I certainly understand what that looks like up close. But I've also watched this person, my wife, Dr. Leticia Skay Jackson, learn how to balance that workload and really helped me as an administrator, gleaning insights from her on how she manages that homework workload, bringing that stuff inside the home, and then how that helped me kind of create a sense of balance, or try to create a sense of balance for myself as an administrator. But it's definitely, I believe a crisis that affects so many teachers of where to stop the day officially and separate into your home life.
Yeah, what we're talking about here for this last misconception, and Dr. Jackson talked about it great there with all of us bringing things home, is the misconception is that you must grade everything you assign. And I feel this is really strong. I actually was just talking to a great awesome new teacher in my building. I actually taught him as a 7th grader. So that makes me feel very, very, very old, but that's fine. It's okay. Now I walked in the first day, he's sitting there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I taught you. What are you doing here? And he was like, oh, I work here now. I was like, cool. I'm going to go cry in the bathroom because how old I am.
Yeah, that's a strange
It is. But he's a great kid, and professional is already killing it. And it's one thing I was just talking to him, Holland, that you have to grade everything, and he was like, yeah, I kind of feel that, like I don't want anything to not be important. Practice is important. Every assignment should have some type of feedback, of course, and that's what we kind of think with grades. Like, we don't ever want a kid to do something and then just be like, oh, yeah, that was for nothing, y'all. We want to give them a grade or something to make sure that they have that. But I'm telling you right now, new teachers, veteran teachers who may be feeling this but just be afraid to kind of accept that because they feel like they're not really doing their job if they don't grade it, you will exhaust yourself if you're grading 2 assignments a day for 7 classes, right? Like, that's going to happen. It's just going to pile up. And then are you really grading it accurately? Or are you doing spot checks? When we talk about that feedback, you can do feedback in small chunks. It could be objective, it can be actionable. And it can let students know where they are in the relationship to the mastery target without a grade. And it doesn't have to be something like that. It could just be a quick check to where you assess how your kids are doing. And then you kind of go back to the whole class just from looking over them. What are your thoughts on grading everything, Ron?
Yeah, to me, man, this gets into that idea of the art and the science of teaching. And here's what I mean by that. Today's kids are beyond pragmatic. They're very practical. They're like, what is in this for me? What do I get out of this? Now, by and large, man, that's a byproduct of the system that they've been educated in the world that they've been raised in. So, man, this is a struggle for me. I think it's really a bit of friction here because the kids are like, well, why are we doing this? What are we getting out of this? So now, as an educator, you're going to try to teach this more complex idea of, hey, we're practicing here to sharpen our saw. However, it does not quantify in terms of a grade. So ... And you're kind of left in this nebulous void of, okay, so tell me again while we're doing this. Okay, I got it. I'm practicing to get better for a thing that you will measure at some point, but we're not measuring it today. We're just practicing it. It creates this very interesting feedback loop between teacher and students that, if you're not careful, can become unmanageable. This swell of students then becomes, well, we're not doing this because you're not measuring it. So I don't know, man. I've certainly seen that play out both ways. It goes back to that art and science. So then it becomes the artful teacher who is able to, inspire their students to do it this way to meet an end result that is quantified and measured. But man, that's such a gray area, and asking, new teachers, young teachers, inexperienced teachers to be that artful and masters of that domain early on, man, that's challenging because it's just so easy to default and say, hey, everything I put out there, we grade, friends. You'll see it in the grade book, so make sure it gets done.
It's definitely a balance, I think, that you have to make sure that. I think a big part of that, too, as I'm thinking about it, is, students naturally, they ask that. We've all had that question of, as soon as you pass them out, Dr. Lauer, yeah, is this for a grade? And then you're like, right. Well, I really wasn't thinking about using it for a grade. This all happening in your head as I asked. I wasn't thinking about using it for a grade. It was just going to be kind of a quick thing to make sure you're getting it. Is almost like extra notes if you want. Like, hey, you're taking in this information. But, as you think of that, you have to also, you can't just say, no, you can't give them that explanation, because the teenage brain has a utility thing. Remember, we talked in the first episode. They're lining up all the things that are important to them. So if this doesn't affect them, then they're saying, well, then why would I put fidelity into it? Why would I work hard on it? Because I can quickly do it if it's not for a grade, and then get to things that are important to me. They want that novelty, right? That's a part of the teenage brain. That's why they always want to try new things or possibly do things that we would consider dangerous. As you get older, you learn how to say no more, like the older you get, when you're like 17, your friends are like, hey, we're going to go sit in the parking lot of Walmart and hang out all night. You're like, yeah, I want to hang out. Now it was like a 30-year-old, my friends are like, hey, we're going to go do this. I'm like, nah, I'm good. Or stay home, right? Because we don't seek that novelty as much. We know what's important to us, but teens don't.
So Jordan, but this comes back to exhaustion, bro. Because ultimately, these are the kinds of conversations that are happening almost daily in classrooms that grate you over time. I mean, they just exhaust you, because at the end of the day, it's ultimately for nothing. I mean, we're just this constant battle, this push-pull of, hey, we're doing this, we need to do this. I don't want to do this. Of course you don't want to do that, but we need to do it because it's good for this reason. Tell me again why it's good for that reason. I mean, man, that kind of back and forth constantly is, I think, what most people don't understand about general education. This is what we deal with on a daily basis, where it's not extreme. I mean, we're not talking about violence. We're not talking about being insulted, but we are talking about this constant wearing down of my willpower to fight this collective pushback of what we're trying to do. I mean, that stuff is exhausting, and grading fits right into that matrix.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that grading is, for me, being in the classroom, you create a lesson, you teach the lesson, you field all the feedback from, those little micro conversations you're talking about. Is this for a grade? Why do we have to do this? You're constantly checking, like, hey, as you make this, we make assignments that reflect our lesson, like it hits the key points you want them to know. And now you're walking around also being like, hey, number 2 is really important, because we created that through our lens of like, how can they get this information? And again, to them, it's that novelty. They're like trying, like, it's a checkbox. Get this worksheet done, or get this activity done, move on to the thing I want to do. Where we look at it through the lens of, you had this lesson, here's this activity. This will really nail in these ideas I want you to have for the final assessment, for the EOC at the end of the year, for the next activity, but they don't see it that way. So then you're also walking around making sure they're putting, again, fidelity into number 2, because number 2 in your mind, as you create less, like, that's like the crux right there. There it is. Like, if you get
but I love that. I love that piece you just said there. And let's don't lose that. Stay there for a second. You said they don't see it that way, in quotes. They don't. So I'm assuming they, in this case, is students. Right. So students don't see it that way. Man, let's just dig in on that for a second. They don't see what that way. I know where you're going, but I want to clarify this so we can really get into the different mindsets and attitudes of what we're talking about. Because it boils down to this, which comes to exhaustion: teachers versus students. So they don't see it that way. Students don't see what that way.
I think they don't see that, again, we're coming through different lenses. Again, to them, it's a checkbox, like, do this, get the grade. You're seeing that as extension of the lesson, right? So when I talked about this subject, when I was doing maybe a quick little like breakdown of a PowerPoint, like quick little lecture or something to make them get it, we see it as, oh, this is an extension of that. To where they see it, oh, the teacher is done talking. They've handed me this activity. This is now something I need to finish. They don't see it as an extension of that learning.
Yeah.
So then they just try to get it done. You know, how many times, I mean, when your time in the classroom, they ask or you ask something on a worksheet or a write-up or focusing on something, and you're walking around kind of talking to them, looking at it, and you see that they're just given the bare minimum for
of course.
a question.
And let's dig in on that for a second, because, you know, I'm a former ELA teacher, so diction is important to me. You've used the word extension a couple of times. So the teacher sees it as this extension. You know, it's an enhancement to the lesson. We're sharpening your saw. The kids see it as extra. Dude, this is extra that you're asking us to do that maybe we didn't address on the front end. I've got my 10-year-old son in my brain right now, right?
Right, that's a great point.
If I do not specify on the front end what we're going to be doing, and I want to pepper in something extra later, that's met with intense resistance. You didn't say we were doing that on the front end. So I always loved those teachers. I tried to be one. I loved when I would observe them, but they would start off with an agenda, and maybe that agenda item had like 6 or 7 things on it. But this particular teacher would say, but you know what? If we're really focused and we're optimizing our time here, I'm going to knock off the last 2 pieces on the agenda. You know, kids, let's do it. Let's get focused, y'all. You know, they collectively decide we're going to dig into this thing. But you're giving them all of that on the front end. So there's that part. But I wanted to go back to your statement, you know, they don't see it that way. And I think that's important for us to dig into, man, because it begs the question, why? Why don't students see it that way? And if we can begin to dig into that and answer some of that, I think that helps with the friction, man, that we fight constantly, which leads to this exhaustion. Why are they feeling that way?
Yeah, I think when they feel that way, it's, again, trying to get back to the things that they want to do. And all teachers try to build that buy-in for a lesson, right? Like you said, having an agenda is great. I always have a screen up on my TV. You know, none of us really have whiteboards anymore. We have these giant TVs. Now I have a screen that has like what we're doing today for each class. That way they can kind of check it off in their mind. And I try to build just like you said, to build that buy-in, I'll say, hey, this connects to this. If you do this well, you'll understand it. You know, and they just feel that because they see this buildup of things they have to do. And I think they naturally push back against that because, again, we're talking about teenage development all the time on here. That'll be a constant theme because that's our clientele, either teens or elementary, they're adolescents getting to teenage, that level. But they see it as a buildup of, hey, how can the things we have to do to get to what I want to do, right? I have to do this. They're saying it's important. If they like you, if they want to do well, they naturally still want to do that. But they also have that pull of, if I get through this, if we don't have a lot to do, then I can turn and talk about whatever I want to talk about, right? Whatever's important to me. So we're kind of fighting that, the social development. Now, there are other kids in the room, right? That's the whole point. To them, it is, teenagers look at it as, I have to be here. I have to listen to this person. If they want to do well in class, they have that. But to them, it's more of like, my friends are in here. You know, we look at it as like, this is my class. To them, this is a class I have to do. But it's also a social event because that's what matters to teens. They are, we're social beings.
And I like how you're putting that sociological piece onto it. My brain was going in a different direction, but you're absolutely true. I mean, I'm in here with my friends. Ultimately, I'm trying to get to the point where we're finished with the work and I'm having a good time hanging with my friends. I totally respect that. I'm also wondering, though, because education ultimately, and I'm talking about just learning, not public education. You know, learning is non-linear, man, in terms of how we get our information, you know, how we store it and code it in the brain. It's non-linear. But in terms of school and how students have done school, it's very linear. And here's where I'm going with that. Do you remember when it was very popular, like teaching for mastery, okay, where a student may fail everything, all the assignments, they don't do any homework, but when you give them the test, the assessment, they pass it. However they did it, they're able to pass it. And there was this argument at that time, well, how could you fail a kid? I mean, that passed the assessment. He literally did nothing else. but he was able to pass the assessment. I mean, how could you in good faith fail that kid? Because he's mastered it, right? He's mastered the standards. But I can remember those teachers that would dig in their heels, but he's done nothing else, right? So think about that now in terms of this linear continuum, and you're that kid, and I'm not thinking of the kid who does nothing else, bro. I'm now thinking of the grade grubbing kid, the kid who knows how to play school, the kid who shows up to learn, yes, but to get the grade even more so. So that kid will push back now. Is this for a grade? And if it's not, why am I doing that? So that teacher that now has to battle both sides of that student coin, the kid who A, literally doesn't want to do anything, but can still pass your test with mastery, and B, the grade grubbing student who wants to do absolutely everything as long as it's for a grade. It's exhausting, bro.
It is, yeah. That dance is difficult because, again, yeah, you're right. There are kids who know how to play that system. They are the hyper intelligent kids, but they also don't have that second part of making sure their grade's pristine. I think there's two different levels. So the kids are like, I can get by with this, I can do everything and get a great grade. Then there's kids who are like, if I get a 99.7, the world is over. Those same kids probably are the same intelligence, but again, they have that different idea of what's needed to do well. Right. So you've told me as a teacher, your tests are worth more. So I'm going to get 80s on your worksheets and then knock the test out of the park. Boom, I got an A. You know, where you have the other kid who's like, I need an A on everything because that is how I feel. So you're fighting those two things. And that's one thing we talked about when I was kind of go into about that feedback. If you're giving feedback on stuff that's not exactly a grade, that's fine. And we talked about that initial question, is this for a grade? Being a little spicy here, teachers may not want to hear it. It's okay to say yes, even if you're maybe not, to get that buy-in.
Right. And hey, I'm gonna agree with you there. And like always, my friend, I'm gonna challenge you a little bit there, though. If you're gonna do that, which I wholeheartedly agree with, if you're gonna do that, man, that requires, and that word is intentional, that requires you building that culture of continuous improvement in your classroom up front. I mean, those kind of expectations, man, have to be established from the beginning. That's why I use the word culture. That culture has to permeate throughout your classroom. Man, that's just what we do in here. That's the student voice coming out. Man, new kid comes into class. We got to do what? Man, student A sitting next to him says, man, that's just what we do in here. That's that culture of continuous improvement. So yeah, back to your point. They're going to say, are we grading this? No, we're not. In here, we have a culture of continuous improvement. Not everything is going to be quantified for a grade, but what we do in here is purposeful, it's driven, it's intentional, directly correlates to the objective, which will be measured on this assessment. I mean, you have to speak with that kind of firmness, but that firmness has to be anchored in that culture that you set from the beginning.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like being open with that I'm going to look at this and this builds on that and you're going to have to do it because I want you to get here is important. I think that goes back to the feedback, right? I think if you're intentional about talking to your class of, look, this might have a letter grade, right? That's not the only type of grade for y'all. You know, I may be checking this and this mastery. So I might come back and I might, as you're doing it, I might walk around. I might read 2 of the questions and just give you a check mark on that. That means you're doing a good job. You don't know which 2 I'm doing. Right? I might walk around in 3, 4, and I think that builds it. Yeah, and that's that feedback we're talking about. You don't have to take everything home or grade it at your desk or in your planning for the type of check every single thing, get your little teacher slider chart out. I had 20 things on this quick little worksheet, so they missed 3.
But see, look, right there, what you did, bro, perfect point, perfect example of that art versus science. You just stepped into the science realm, Okay. So there are things that are being measured. Here's how I am measuring it. Could be check marks, like you said. It could be I'm going to look at these 2 questions, but you don't know which 2 questions. I mean, you've put your foot now firmly in the science side of how I do this. So if I'm a kid, there's a little bit of uncertainty here. But what do we know about uncertainty? It impacts focus. Ooh, now I'm more focused because I don't know which ones he's checking. So I've got to be focused. He is measuring it. He's been explicit about how he's measuring it through these check marks. So it's not subjective. I mean, he's walking around and seeing if I'm doing it, if he calls on me for this question. I love that kind of stuff because it's intentional, it's scientific, but it helps you scale how to do these kinds of assignments, this kind of work without burdening yourself with having to do all of it. And I wanted to touch that, man, because you do make a couple of really good points in there. But I also want our young teachers, our new teachers, to truly feel and understand that when we tell you you don't have to grade it all, that's not the panacea. I mean, you're going to get this kind of pushback from students. So we want to give you the approach, the strategies, the tactics, the science and the art of how to do it effectively, because it is exhausting at the end of the day.
Oh, man, it is. And, for new teachers out there, like I was kind of saying, you have an activity, a worksheet out there, right? It's not just like a crossword puzzle. I think that's what's the bad ones sometimes, which those are okay when you need them. But you have a worksheet out there, and as a teacher, a new teacher, it has 10 questions on it. And you collect it. So now you have 70 of those worksheets from your classroom, from your classes, and you're like, oh, I got to check these. You don't. You are the teacher. Know which ones are the ones that really nail in and just do a quick spot check. And that's that feedback I'm talking about. And I think we've gotten into this thing to where, it's pressure from the outside world, the state. It might be pressure from parents because, again, the old school tactic of like, you get a grade for everything. Oh, you got an 83 on this. Oh, you got a 92 on this. And that makes your average. And if they don't see that, if they see a check mark on a paper, they're like, well, how does that help my kid? Like, did that affect their grade? It's like, no, but that affect their learning, that affect their knowledge. And I think we've filtered this so much to get that we've made students look at it as if every worksheet is a one-off, right? Like this is a quick microcosm of my abilities. And if I don't give positive feedback on that, I'm not saying any type of feedback, if I don't get that number on there, I don't know where I am. Where learning is not like that. Learning is cumulative. It's a snowball. You push down a hill, right? It starts off as about a volleyball size. You roll down the hill, and by the time it gets there, it is huge. That's what learning is. So we get into that, and it kind of creeps in. And you want to hear a kind of a heartbreaking story about this from a first grade girl who got in trouble for throwing her papers out the bus window. So this little girl's on the bus. The bus is driving down the road. She's in first grade, and she's throwing paper out the window. So obviously the bus driver pulls over, talks to her, has to throwing stuff out the window, kind of writes her up. She goes in the principal's office. They ask her why she was doing that, and she says this: when my teacher grades our worksheet, she either gives us a sticker or writes okay on it. I was throwing away my papers with just okay, so I'd only bring home papers with stickers. She's like, so this girl, she's already doubting her abilities based on a random kind of grading strategy, and I think that's the important thing, that teacher kind of grading it that way. I think we have to think through of how our feedback is coming out, because that's a first grade girl and she's already processed sticker means I'm good. Okay means it's not as good as it should be. I don't want my parents to think I'm not as good. So it's okay. If they're telling you, hey, we need everything graded, I think that's okay to not do it that way. I think it's okay to make sure that you're given, again, that type of feedback. Okay is probably not the best feedback for that age level. You're doing great, keep going, something. And I think that's what the problem is with grading everything, is we get in that thing of this boom number, or boom comment, to where you should say, hey, you're doing great on this. There's a way we can build them up and let them know how they're doing without either just a specific number or an okay. I think we can build on either of those to kind of work on getting our feedback better and kind of break that, because, again, maybe if those worksheets that if you're just going to give an okay on, or if you're not going to give that, maybe have a different way. Don't hand it back to them like that.
And I think that's a really good segue here for us, because if you take that problem and you start talking about the implications of that, where how does this scale, grading everything, what we're talking about here, how does that scale? Well, it doesn't. What it does result in is burnout, which brings us to these statistics. You had shared with me a number of teachers either exiting the profession or the percentage of vacancies, these positions we can't fill. I mean, I think this is one of the pillars behind these kind of statistics is, you just can't scale grading everything. In fact, what it results in, the implication of that is burnout. And we know what happens when teachers burn out. Offline, you would ask me as a principal, had I really felt, because I think one of my calling cards as principal is I served as principal before the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic. So what was that kind of looking at pre, during, post? And the reality is, where it was never a challenge, an issue to hire a social studies teacher, never a challenge, an issue, to find an English teacher, it got to the point, second year post-pandemic, where you couldn't find teachers for some of your easiest positions to fill. I'm even talking PE, social studies, senior English. You couldn't fill these positions. We're not talking math, dude. Right. We're not talking chemistry. We're not talking AP European history. I'm talking about these bread and butter positions, that we have not been able to fill post-pandemic. And I think this is one of the big reasons why.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at some of those statistics, I talked a little about in the mailbag episode, there's 500,000 plus fewer educators post-pandemic. More than 61% of administrators have found it difficult to hire that personnel, like you talked about. The Wall Street Journal said 44% of public schools posted teaching vacancies in early 2022. Those are type of things that it's telling you that this burnout is an actual thing. And again, talking about grading, just let's break it down this way in numbers wise. According to Merrimack College and EdWeek research centers, the average median hours for teachers are 54 hours a week. 25 of those hours are actually teaching students where you're up talking. The rest is planning, grading, any other work we have to do outside of teaching. And that's what we're talking about here, is bringing that home. Think about that. The average work week is 54 for a teacher. In a 40-hour work week, I know other professions work long and have those hours, but usually you work those hours. That's to get something done. It's to get through a task, and then maybe the next task you do, it might be less because it's not as. This is every single week because the task doesn't change for us. The case isn't, lawyers. The case isn't all of a sudden bigger. It might be an easier case. It's not a difficult one that you got to dig into at night, and maybe you work longer hours that week on that case. This is just every day for every day of the school year. And that's what we're talking about, like bringing that home.
Which is why when you're an educator or you're related to an educator, you're in a relationship with, sibling, etc., parent of, and the argument becomes summers off, and I put that in air quotes, you've got your summers off. Dude, I work 54 hours a week median, okay? That's the average. Sometimes it skews even more. And by the time I get to the summer, man, I am so mentally drained, exhausted, physically withdrawn. If I don't have this summer, there would be no sustainability. You would have no educational workforce. I mean, so I get sick of hearing that argument about, yeah, but you get an entire summer off. You're talking about people who have been in a crucible for 10 months working in these kinds of environments where you're pushing yourself to your physical, mental, spiritual maximums. And now you're giving me grief about this time off in the summer? I mean, so I do think that educators need those kind of advocates to champion for them in that much needed space of time off to try to get that balance. Because even then, it's still too little. So when I hear people arguing about you get those summers off, man, it makes my blood boil a little bit because of that stat you just gave there, 54 hours a week median average for teachers and their workload. And you're right. a lot of that is coming home, dude. I see it here. And when you've got a 10-year-old boy who's been waiting all day to see his mother, and she has stuff that she has to get done when she gets home because, again, in air quote, grades are due.
Right.
You know, it impacts the home, man, and it really starts to cut into your quality of life.
It does, yeah. And I always tell people, I'm like, we're not paid for the summer, right? I think a lot of people, there's a misconception out there that we have to teach, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, you get a 2-month vacation where you get paid. No, I'm a 10-month employee. My paycheck goes through the school year. So now, luckily, through modern banking and stuff, we're able to spread it out. I used to have to like save and put it in a bank account to basically give myself a paycheck throughout the summer.
Yeah, and you're letting other folks look under the hood a little bit. You've got these two options, right? You can take the lump sum option where you get the big check but no money in the summer, or you can take the spread out option. I don't know the official name for that, but that's where they're going
the depression
to
check.
Yeah, they're going to pull
where I get
a little
sad
bit
when I see it.
Each check, right? So it's less than every 2 weeks, but you still get those checks in the summer, which aren't as big as your regular checks. But you're not getting paid in the summer. You're a 10-month employee. You're just choosing to take less on the front end so that you have enough to feed your family during the summer.
Yeah, and I think so. Your talk there, let's transition here. We talked about grading. Mentioned you got a 10-year-old boy, and they're waiting for you. My children are waiting for me to get home, and then you just have stuff to do. So let's take a quick change and talk about exhaustion and our relationships. So talking about exhaustion relationship, teachers I've talked to, they often fear being vulnerable with their struggles from work. We talked about this already with maybe our other teachers or even our administrators fearing being vulnerable because you want to be seen as the weak teacher. But this time, though, we're at home. We're fighting the war at home against exhaustion. So now we're sometimes worried about being vulnerable with our spouses, right? Our spouse can take it, especially if they're non-educators. Right? Both of us have educator spouses. So where I'm coming from this, I've observed, I've sat around, because what do teachers do when they're not at work, but they're hanging out with other people to teach? They talk about teaching because it is our life, right? It's what we care about. So you have, but non-educator spouses, we often can worry that they're just see it as complaining. It makes you feel very alone because you're sitting there, you're just complaining about work, and everybody does this, but teachers do it often because we have a new situation every day. But if you're afraid to talk about it, this can build resentment between you and your spouse. And now that work exhaustion has crept into your home like creeping death. You're feeling it. It is clenching your chest. But now you're like, gosh dang it, I just literally talked to my husband, talked to my wife, talked to my boyfriend, girlfriend yesterday about this situation that made me feel so exhausted or worn out or angry. And now I got a new one today. Do I talk about that? Do I vent? Or are they just going to be like, good Lord, if you're going to complain about this so much, get a new job, man. Like, come on, you know? So our non-educator spouses, I think it stems from, and, jump in if you feel a little different. One, this persona of education is not really a profession, right? It's a job. And I think that makes our exhaustion, and we fight against that every day. That's one of the reasons we're doing this show, because it is a profession, but it can make your exhaustion seem less tangible, because when you compare it, maybe your husband or wife is a lawyer and they're like, oh my gosh, I had to deal with this and this judge wouldn't listen. And those are high stakes things. And then we come in and say, oh my gosh, I had this 13-year-old who just kept interrupting my class. And we quantify that because of the result, like court case. Big deal. Teaching, important, but not maybe right there on that level as a court case. But exhaustion is real. Like I said in the mailbag, teaching is a profession of the soul. We don't get partnerships. We don't get raises, really. We do this because we care. And so now you feel like, well, I mean, my wife just talked to me. My husband just talked to me for 20 minutes about how if this doesn't happen the right way, their client might go to jail. So, but then now you're sitting there like, I'm exhausted because I've had to deal with this kid every day who won't stop interrupting. And you might feel like that's less, but.
Well, and I think here's the fundamental problem with it. The fundamental problem, and I'm speaking as, a 45-year-old adult who's in an 11-year marriage, who lives with a 19-year teaching veteran. So Admittedly, I'm not the most qualified person to talk about being in a relationship with an educator and having no education frame of reference. So I'm thinking of that person, who works in advanced manufacturing, but their wife or husband is a teacher. I'm thinking of that person. And here's the fundamental problem. The expectation when you're outside of the education profession is if you signed up to be a teacher, right? You applied, you went through the process, man, you got your degree in it. You're in this mindset, you've signed up for it. Now the job's here and it's happening to you, and now you're bringing it home. The fundamental understanding and expectation is you signed up for that. So everything you're complaining about, you signed up for it. Everything that you're experiencing, you signed up for it. I think we have this idea, this collective consciousness about public education especially, that it is a grind, that it is a hot mess in certain areas. But you know what? You signed up for it. What are you complaining about? We all know this. The Simpsons have been just, humiliating public education for a generation. So what are we talking about here? Why are you complaining? You signed up for this. I think that's a general sentiment, man. And not to get into people's relationships, because there are caring partners. There are those that empathize. But I'm going to have to share, and I'll be vulnerable and transparent here for a minute. As an educator, my wife as well, man, therapy has helped me in a lot of different areas of my life, but specifically, and I'm currently in therapy, friends, specifically, therapy has helped me with being present. And that's ultimately the greatest gift we can give somebody. So when you are with your spouse, man, the ability to be present and listen to that pain that they're sharing, it is a game changer in your relationships. But back to the point that we're talking about, you go through that one night, man, you have to be ready to turn right around and get that again the next day and maybe the day after that. That's ultimately what we're talking about here. And friends, I'm going to go back to the word of this entire 3-arc episode. It's exhausting, but it's still a reality that so many of us are dealing with.
I mean, it is like you do have to go through it. And, I talked to a teacher about this who, has a non-educator spouse, and, they're never going to understand the stress of being a teacher. I always find that funny. You said you signed up for it, right? That's always the thing. And I'm going to say this, all professions are dealing with stuff. I don't ever want it to sound like we're just saying like, hey, it's more stressful or it's harder. We're just talking through this lens to help educators deal with their exhaustion, right? Like that is our goal. I can't fix how a lawyer, doctor, anybody feels, but we can talk about teachers to make that feel, and they're never going to understand that stress, even though I think people kind of do, but they really don't get it. Every time I meet somebody who's not a teacher, or they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a teacher. And they kind of like their head goes back. It's kind of a little shocked thing for a second. They're like, oh man, I could never do what you do. Like, and you always get that, but then there's also this like other side of, hey, stop complaining. And this teacher she said, my constant venting really wore out our relationship. It was frustrating to my husband to listen to me complain about the same things day after day, and he would often try to fix the problem by offering solutions that were completely impractical because it seemed he didn't understand the expectations. And that's the issue there. And I think a lot of spouses, especially once you have children, I think this is where some of the issue, like your spouse may look at it, or your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever your relationship is, may look at it as like, I have stresses at home, at work too. But then you have kids. They kind of get what you're talking about because they've dealt with those same issues with your children, because it's, these are standard behavior issues or standard things with kids. And so they're like, I don't get it. Like, you do this at home. I see you take care of this. Why at work is it just knocking you down so much? We have to talk about it every day and it's stressing you out so much. Like, why don't you just do this? And I think there's like, with our kids, it is this way. But when you have, again, class sizes, 25 different unique personalities, it really starts to weigh on you.
Yeah, but you're also getting into, that willpower is finite. And there's a great study on this. If you've ever read the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, they go into the radishes and chocolate chip cookies study, which ultimately measures that our willpower is finite. Right. So, you're a teacher and you're keeping it together all day. Or parallel example, you're a 10-year-old boy with dyslexia and inattentive ADHD, and you're keeping it together all day. I mean, you're really focused. You're trying hard throughout the school day. And when you get home, I mean, your willpower is finite. It's drained. I don't have it anymore. So now that I'm here, I have to
let it out
and just let all that out. And whatever that looks like for you, you know, that takes many shapes and forms and sizes for different people. But when we get home, our willpower is just so diminished. We have to either end up just info dumping, or we're a hot mess of emotions, or we have to go crash out on the bed, whatever that looks like for you. Or we spend an hour and a half in the gym because we've just got to de-stress and get all of that out. But that truly does get inside of that world of people that are under that kind of pressure to keep it together, whether that's keeping your focus, whether that's keeping your head level, whether that's keeping your emotions in check. I mean, that's really challenging for people to do day after day after day when they're dealing with intense adversity. And teaching as a profession falls right into that crucible.
Yeah, and I think when you are dealing with that, there's a crucible. I love that you said that. And that's what we're trying to do here, talking about this stress on relationships too, because that's our biggest thing, because your home's kind of your safe space. Your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, like those are your safe spaces. That's why you're with them, because they make you feel comfortable. And you don't want to add exhaustion to yourself because you need the vent or you feel this and you're afraid to bring it into that space because you don't want to alienate them. You make them just frustrated, make them afraid, like, oh gosh, okay, we're both home and now I'm going to hear 40 minutes of why English class was so bad today, and that starts to build that resentment. Message to spouses, go get your spouse if you're listening. I'll wait. Talking to them. Bill, Harry, Jim, Becky, Samantha, whatever your name is, spouses, it is different. It is hard. We're trying to do our best job and we're dealing with things, and all the things we're dealing with are keeping us from doing that best job. So I'm telling you right now, it is hard. So that exhaustion from dealing with that is hard, but also not only complaining, but bringing the work home, right? Like the war at home with exhaustion. Bringing work home can also cause that resentment. That exhaustion seeps in. So when you bring our work home, we're talking about this grading idea. It can start to strain our relationships with our spouses and our children. How many of us teachers have super supportive spouses? Like, they know the gig. We have so many teachers who would just have that person who's like, I know what you do. I know it's hard. I couldn't do it. So I am with you. But humans naturally, like you said, we start to break down. We only have a finite amount of willpower. So really think, listeners out there, how many times you have that super supportive spouse and you've been bringing home an extra tote bag of papers every day. And you get home, you make dinner, you eat, you clean up, and then you sit at your table or wherever you work and you get out those papers and you start grading and working. And this is now an every night thing, because remember, 54 hours a week median.
Right, but let's punch in on that just for a second, because it is going to be an every night thing. And you referenced supportive spouses. You talked about coming home, making dinner, then getting out your stuff on the table, the tote bag, the work. And where you're going with that, it feels like, and this is going to get us to a strategy for folks. When you're doing really hard things, when you're working and living in this kind of a crucible, how do you sustain that? I always love that quote, and I'm going to butcher it, by the Navy SEALs. It's that you don't rise to the occasion. You ultimately fall to your level of training, your systems. Yeah. So systems thinking. So what systems do you have in place at home to help you do these hard things? Case in point. My wife gets home from the teaching day. I'm currently an educational consultant. I'm based out of Middle Tennessee. I have a lot of flex time, so I'm working out of the office at home. So I'm home a lot. She comes home. We have a system where the first few minutes when she gets home, it's put our things down. We embrace with a physical touch. We have a few pleasantries, but we're not addressing the intensity of the day yet. We get through that buffer space where we've set our stuff down. We're using the restroom. We're just, we're getting that off of us. Then we move into this space of you share, I share. It's not exactly timed, but it's under this idea that you're going to go, then I'm going to go, which allows us both this freedom to just info dump, knowing that there's a beginning and an end, and then you go next. And man, that has worked so beautifully for us to just take this time, what we call, time blocking, put that little block on your calendar. You're now making it a system that you can measure, a system that you can adjust. So, hey, when we get home, we don't jump straight into this. We actually have this little buffer of time where we take care of X, Y, Z. Then when we come back together, this is a time for both my spouse and I to share with each other in this round robin style of sharing about the intensity or the joyfulness of our day. Right. But creating that kind of system at home can do so much wonders for you. What do you think about something like that?
Yeah, I love that because like I was saying, like the last thing you want to hear, because again, I think it's really easy to get into that mode of, oh, we do those things. Like even if you do that, right? Like we have those little moments and then you hug and stuff. But in the back of our mind, like even sometimes through that, if we have this idea that we need to have tons of stuff to grade or we need to get this or gosh, I need to make this lesson. In the back of your mind, you're still thinking, when am I going to do that? When am I going to do that? Oh no, like my kid had needed help with homework. I thought I was going to do it at 7 and now it's 8 o'clock. When am I going to do that? And then you jump into it because that's what's driving your brain. And now your spouse is like, yo, we had that little moment, but this is every day. I feel like I'm coming home almost alone. And the last thing we want is like those things to come out of once they hit their limit as support. You don't want to hear like, I miss my wife or I miss my husband or that I miss the time we used to spend together. Or the worst thing, it can get to this sometimes, an ultimatum. You got to either pick work or me because this is ridiculous. So talking about those strategies, I have some here. There's an article here by Angela Watson on truthforteachers.com. And she kind of gives out a way to kind of work on relationships as opposed to just going through this same thing and kind of figuring it out and hope it works. So the first one she talks about is recognize when your priorities are out of whack. Be honest with yourself about what needs to change and what could be the outcomes if it stays the same? Like if you kind of are self-assessing and you're like, I work from the moment dinner's cleaned up and other household things are done, I work from then to bedtime. That's what she's trying to think. Like, you need to assess that. Like, is that sustainable? Can you keep going? There's a quote from a teacher in the article. As much as and this is kind of that thinking as you're assessing this, hopefully this helps teachers. Like, we want you to think of your time at home, to limit that exhaustion. Start to think about this to make sure you're not making yourself more exhausted. A teacher in this says, as much as I love them, these students will be out of my class in 10 weeks. In reality, most won't give me more than a passing thought for their entire lives. My husband will be with me every night for the foreseeable future. What do you think about that, like, perspective right there?
Hey, man, right. And I love that you put that quote in there. It's powerful to me for a couple of reasons. Here's number one. What's one of the biggest reasons we can't retain teachers, we can't get more teachers into the profession? Number one's got to be pay. Is the pay competitive? Is it competitive to this district? Is it competitive to this other industry? Okay, by and large, we've done better to bring the pay up. Is it still where it needs to be? Most educators working 54 hours on average a week would tell you, no, it's not. Okay, so if we hold that, the pay is not where it needs to be. Well, we make up for that. We offset that limited pay with this grandiose idea that the work you're doing is so important.
Right.
It's so powerful. You may not be getting financially compensated how you need to be. However, in terms of purpose, in terms of fulfillment, man, this work is significant, right? So keep it through that lens. Now you're taking that lens of significance, purpose, how big this work is, things like life-changing get thrown out there. And you apply that to your relationship with every kid in all of your classes. I mean, how that seeps into a teacher's ethos, man, and makes you feel. And then you expect a teacher not to bring that kind of weight home. So I like that quote here from that teacher. I really do, because it's very, very true.
Yeah.
You know, I thought about that same thing as a principal too. I mean, this community that I'm serving, that I'm so just ingratiated in, will continue to be here long after me. I mean, but the people that I live with, that care for me, that want to be here with me, they're struggling now and will continue to be with me long after, but I'm not paying them the same kind of service. But I wanted to address that, man. I think that's where teachers get caught into that kind of trap. And it's not their fault, man, because it's the system that we have created that perpetuates this mindset and model. But that's my thoughts on that. Is we're not paying them enough, and we've offset that idea that you don't get paid just in financial compensation. You also get paid in, this is life-changing work that only people like you can do. And man, what I think that does to your mind state, woo.
Yeah, that's a lot to put on a person. You know, you become,
it is
like,
man,
you're
heavy.
holding the future, the development of every kid in your class on your shoulders. You know, I have
Right. If you buy into that kind of grandiose idea of this is what the profession does, right? And a lot of us sell it that way. Come on, man. You know, I dip my toe into the keynote speaking world. You know, I love to inspire, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of these keynoters, dude, that's exactly what the message is. You're a life changer, game changer. You're the only important person in some of these people's lives. I mean, we lay that kind of messaging on teachers all the time and expect them to just internalize it. And a lot of them do.
Yeah, we do. And because, like I said, it's a profession of the soul. And keeping that on them, like, you think about that all the time. And it's just, again, that weight. And that's why I did love that quote too, because sometimes it's okay. And that's, I think, sometimes why teaching has gotten some of the issues. We'll talk about those in the future. But it is that other people, outside forces, are able to leverage that against us, where other professions, they're more able to say no, because there's not that leverage of like, oh, well, if you don't want to do this, you're cool with letting kids down. And that is just an unfair thing to put on people, because, you know, at some point you got to be like, you know what, these kids are going to leave. I may affect them in the class. I'm going to do my job in the class to be that support system, but I cannot alienate my family. Like, my husband or wife is going to be here through thick and thin for everything. And those kids may not even, I may think that I changed that kid's life, and he may see me in Walmart 3 years from now and maybe not even do a second glance when he sees me. And that's nothing against the kid, right? That I may be, and then maybe that's that different in perception. We feel that weight because everybody's put it on us, right? Like, they may have nobody at home. They may have nobody who listens to them. And we put that on everything. And maybe you know a couple things about the kid. They may just be thinking, this is my history teacher. I'm glad he's nice. I'm glad he listens. But they may not apply that same weight, but we're carrying that home. And now you have your husband or wife sitting across from you, literally telling you, I need more time with you. And we're weighing that against, like, yeah, well, you're an adult. You've agreed to marry me. You're in this. So I need to help this kid because, you know, my cape is on 24 hours a day. I am super teach Superman. I need to help him. And I think it's important to realize that. I fully expect me and my wife to be sitting on the front porch in rocking chairs when I'm 72. I don't think a person in my 5th period history class is going to be texting me or calling me when I'm 72. Hopefully they'll be out having fulfilling, wonderful lives themselves. So we have to make sure it doesn't ruin that.
Now, you know, I don't want to exclude our administrators from this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, and here's the example I'm going to give you for principals that applies to exactly what we were talking about for teachers. You know, I heard this about principals the other week, and I love the analogy. But great principals are those who can absorb the most pain for a school. Man, think about that again.
Wow. Yeah.
Great principals are those who can absorb the most pain for a school. So think of that as a sponge. So I'm absorbing all this pain. And as a former principal, man, I just relate to that analogy. You're just absorbing. I'm good. Ooh, I absorbed it over here. It didn't affect the school. I'm absorbing it over here. Classes kept running. I'm absorbing, you're absorbing all that. You're this sponge. So then you come home and you've absorbed all that. You are this fully sopping sponge, just seeping, with it coming out. And how do I rinse that at home? Because I'm full. I don't have any more, capacity to bring anything else in. Man, that is a dangerous place to be as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as a son, whatever it may be. But that's the life of administrators through this same lens of what teachers are dealing with, internalizing all of that, with their students, whether it's, man, you're life-changing for these kids. They don't have anybody but you. Put the cape on, keep it on. Man, the administrator side of that is very, very similar. You're absorbing all of this pain so that your school can continue to run optimally, effectively. And when you get home, you're just absolutely filled. And it's how you wring out that sponge that ultimately allows you, to be back into discover mode where you can be with your family fully in the present, living joyfully, all that kind of jazz, man. At the end of the day, what's the word we've been talking about, man? It is exhausting.
Yeah, and I think that the idea, we have to get in this mindset that you can do all those things at work, be there for your kids and stuff, but we need to keep this exhaustion creeping into our homes. You can't be full because guess what? Your spouse and your kids need you too. And that's a lot, right? Like you're doing your job and they need you. And again, that quote, they're important. So how can we kind of have that sponge of those things we're feeling not as full when we get home, or not pile on top? Because none of us are going to be like, hey, I had a hard day. I've been counselor, teacher, friend, protector, supporter to 125 kids all day. I don't have anything left for you. None of us are going to do that. So what do? Our sponge is full. So we literally be like, oh, I'll just add stuff on top of it. And then we're not where we're supposed to be. So one of the strategies in this article to help that too is creating boundaries, right? And that sounds so simple. Everybody right now listens like, oh, well, of course I do that. But do you? What are your boundaries? Are those things you're saying you're doing that? Or are they real boundaries? So like, for example, we're trying to make sure this doesn't creep in at home. So we're talking about relationships and your spouse, make sure, don't get in that drive of Friday and Saturday is when I don't work. I'll do some stuff Sunday to prepare for Monday, but Friday and Saturday are my days. That's not enough. Because especially when you have kids, now Friday and Saturday become, baseball tournament. Doing this. So when are you creating that with your time? So, set a couple things you can do according to the article. Set date nights with your spouse. Like literally set times to do things. Now, I'm not saying it has to be extravagant, but just set days where you don't have anything you bring home for the purpose of you're going to go home and do something with your spouse. And now if something crazy comes up, of course, you talk to your spouse, adjust that, but have some time and don't count doing dishes or folding laundry as time because you're not working. That's still work. We're trying to understand what our spouse are thinking too. You're still working. So to them, they're doing a task. And to you, it's like, oh, look, we're talking while we're folding laundry. This is nice. Neither of us are working. They're probably looking at that like, oh, well, let's get this done and then we can do something. Where a lot of teachers are like, oh, I have to do this and then I'll start working.
You got me thinking about something funny because you keep using the word work, and I think it's important to address this. We're talking about how to be successful at home. So you've left the workday; it's very intense. You're now home, and how can we, decompress? How can we connect better with our families? So the idea for me goes back to that word work that you said. You're going to have to create a system at home, which on the front end is a bit of work. Create a calendar, literally time block You're making a system for how you function at home after the workday. This is so counterintuitive for most educators. It just really is, because for the most part, our day is planned out for us. We operate and move by bell schedules. We know how long our class times are. We know how long the passing periods are. We know when our faculty meeting's going to be on what day of what week each month. These things are fed to us. And then we get home and it's the Wild West. And we don't really want to be in that kind of confined system anymore because we're now at home. But then we get off and realize that because our willpower is so finite, we don't have the capacity to keep it together at home. We're all over the place, which brings us back to work. You've got to build a system for how to function better at home. And when you put in that work on the front end to create that kind of system, whether it's a buffer when you first get home, whether it's time blocking to communicate with your spouse at work, but you both get shared time to share your personal stories, or if it's, hey, here's when I'm going to do this with my kids. All of that can be put into a system that you use manageably, effectively, sustainably at home. But it is a bit of work. But when you do it, man, things flow so much smoother.
And everybody's happy.
For educators.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that, one of the things the article talks about that I really like, because I think this is something a lot of teachers don't think of, because we have extra duties. If you're not a teacher, listen to this. We teach. We're talking about all the stuff we're doing in class. And then it's like, oh, by the way, you got to work this volleyball game. You got to work this basketball game. Hey, your students are in this extracurricular club and they're having a presentation. You should be there for that. That's kind of those little things that, be present in the community. I think one of those strategies that really helps is that work on the front end. You said, match up those things you do with maybe when your spouse has to do something. Talk on the weekend and say, hey, this week I got to work a volleyball game. What do you have? Let them know ahead of time. That way, maybe that's a day where they work late. I literally have some friends, and the wife is a teacher and the husband is not. And she was talking about that she had to, we were all hanging out. We were just talking. And she was like, oh yeah, this Tuesday I have parent teacher conferences, and Thursday there's a band concert they have to be at because two of my students asked me. And the husband was like, so you're not going to be home 2 days this week, basically? And I was kind of sitting there like, uh-oh, I was like, oh gosh, this could become an argument when we're all sitting here. I think that's something that will really help. That is, hey, I have to do this. Do you have anything you have to do at work? Because if you have a meeting you have to go to late at night, that'll be a day that I work late at school, or that'll be a day where I sign up for a volleyball game. Kind of a season of life. People talk about this, especially when you have kids, as sometimes with your spouse, you're ships in the night, right? You're just passing each other, hey, nice to see you.
But it reminds me of that scene, man, in that movie Up in the Air with George Clooney. It's been several years ago, movie. But there's this scene where they're sitting in this hotel room, and it's he and his person he's in a relationship. They've got their calendars in front of them, and it's this essentially hilarious scene of, well, when are you available?
Yeah.
I'm here. I could squeeze in 30 minutes here, and they're looking at those calendars. But it reminds me of something you said a little earlier in the episode about people not seeing teaching as a profession. When you're a professional and you have a calendar and you've got appointments, or you've got a court case, or you've got a meeting with the client, and you're in your calendar, it's those two people sitting across the bed from each other and, hey, when can we pencil this in? I mean, teachers are very much professionals, and you're going to have to utilize the calendar. That's back to your point. Hey, when would be a good night for us to do X? Let's go to our calendars and double check. My wife has really pushed me into embracing the life of a calendar to build these kind of systems for us. But I think that's really important to kind of get your head around. Also, calendars will help us with establishing these boundaries. You absolutely just can't say yes to everything.
Yep.
As a high school principal, man, I just knew when it came to sporting events, when it came to, artistic performances, I'm going to try to be at 90% of those. It's just not sustainable. You have to create boundaries, set a finite number for yourself, pick some ones that are going to be significant, make sure you're at those, and the rest of them, it's going to be okay, man. It's going to be absolutely okay that I'm not there.
An important thing to say, a lot of people know this, again, because of our profession, and we're dealing with kids, so it's very easy to feel guilt. And you don't ever want to say, I'm saying, say this to yourself. No is a complete sentence. No period done, right? Hey, could you come to this? We kind of need a little extra help. No, done. Now, don't say it in a jerky way. You don't have to have an excuse. Like, no, sometimes if you've done your job, it's okay to say no to going to that. You know, again, don't say it straight to a student, but like, and internalize that as like, no is a complete sentence. And we don't say that a lot. We feel bad. Like, oh yeah, I need to go to this game. Oh, the soccer team's playing. I have a bunch of soccer players. Oh, also the football team's playing Friday. Oh, I also have some band kids. Looking at that from the term of relationship, that exhaustion. Now you get home and your spouse like, hey, nice to see you. You're not there. Saying like that, saying no to yourself. You know how many teachers I know that bring work on vacation with them? Like, think about that. They load up the car to go to the beach, and they have a bag of papers to grade, or they have stuff, because in their mind, it's like, oh, the car ride is like time I can get this done. But let's look at that through our kids and families filter. Oh, they're working again. You could just be staring out the window. I get it. Like you see that as valuable time, but like you said, that presence, are you there? Like, that bag alone, the bag of work could already sour your spouse, your kids' view on your attentiveness to this trip or this activity. Even if you don't even pull it out and open it, just because it's there, they know that bag.
Look, 100% agree. I'm also going to make a point of clarification, because there are going to be those teachers, and I have a couple in mind, that this is their lifestyle. Man, this is what they do. It's how they do it, and they do it well. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So this is not to ostracize them. This is certainly not to be critical of them.
Not at all.
It's just that you can't look at that teacher as the expectation. There are going to be those teachers. This is their lifestyle. Teaching is a lifestyle for them, and it's going to work for some of those people. But do not fall into that comparison is the thief of joy trap, that I'm going to use that teacher as my benchmark of what a teaching professional looks like, does, operates inside and outside of school. You just have to be careful not to fall in that trap. For the majority of us, boundaries are imperative. For the majority of us, willpower is finite. For the majority of us, our families need us just as much or more so than the people we're serving. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification, that there are going to be those teachers who can withstand all that. There are going to be those teachers who this is their 360-degree lifestyle, completely impacted by the profession. Do not let those teachers be your benchmark of expectation, because that is a losing battle.
Yeah, it is. And I like that point. It can kind of sound like if I have a system that works well, that's awesome, right? If you have a system that works well and that is your lifestyle, great. What we're asking here is that system working, but are you still feeling exhausted? All right. And these are ways to kind of have a little adjustment to that. Make sure you're being aware, because again, we feel that pressure of my kids need me. I need to do this, right? Having a day where you don't work, maybe like this Thursday nights, we're not doing anything. I'll make sure everything's done prior to that. Another thing to make sure you do as well, talking about this home life relationship, not having that exhaustion or that resentment. I think it's important to, if you feel that your spouse is just getting like, gosh, they just complain about this all the time, set up a strategy. Maybe you have somebody, talk to a friend about it, be open, and maybe you talk to each other on the car ride home and you get your venting out with another teacher who can empathize, or maybe you go to the gym with a teacher. Most important thing I think here is don't play bad day poker. Don't you lay your cards on the table, or your spouse lays their cards, and then you're like, oh, you think you had a bad day? Let me tell you about this. Because then it just becomes this competing venting. Have a strategy for that. Like, don't let that exhaustion at work creep in to your your lifestyle and your family, make sure you're understanding that and set up some things like you said.
That goes back to the idea of, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? If you want to be right and argue with your spouse that my day was tougher than yours and let me show you how and go through the laundry list of things, or do you want to be happy? Do you want to come home, be present, live joyfully? It is that idea ultimately, and it's pretty binary. Do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? So you don't want to get into that bad day of poker with a spouse and just let me continue to trump card you over and over with the laundry list of things that happened negatively to me today. Also it reminded me as a principal, is back to kind of those strategies and tactics. As a principal in our PLCs, I was very hands-on with my ELA PLC because I was a former English teacher. So when we're doing our PLC meetings, I always love to have a little bit of time set aside where my teachers could interact, in a non-scope and sequence conversation about these kinds of ideas. Give us some ideas. You, overzealous teacher who's 100% committed to work, takes it all home, does it. Give us some strategies at home of how you manage that. Then over here, teacher who leaves everything at school, will not touch their text message box, their phone, their email, after the workday. Could you give us some strategies too, and how you have really stopped giving a you-know-what about things after 3 p.m.? Can you kind of walk us through that so we can glean some insight? But giving your teachers this space to have these kind of radical candor conversations, with you there present as well, so you can hear from both sides of these, learning yourself, providing insights and your own ideas because you're a human being too. I think those are healthy conversations, man, to have, manage them, put timestamps on them, but please have them because we're more than just professionals. We're human beings as well who have lives outside of the school day, and we do need to be talking about those as a team.
I think those are important, especially when you have that support, because again, we feel guilty. We feel like, I'm leaving this on my desk. My wife's a teacher too. And I think this really goes to this point. I work a lot. I try to craft things and make it perfect, but I've set aside time at home. Like when I was getting my doctorate, I told myself I am not going to miss any of my kids' games or anything because I have a paper to do. And I pushed myself to exhaustion because I was literally up till like 2 a.m. typing papers because I wanted to be husband, father. And then I was trying to get this doctorate, and that was tough. But I wanted to not miss anything because I was just afraid of that. But there's so many times my wife goes, "Hey, I didn't even bring my backpack home tonight." And I'm like, yeah, to me, that's like, yeah, you're going to work. Because she's one of those, like, she, always perfecting her craft and always working. That almost shouldn't be a point of celebration, like to where it's like, guess what I didn't do tonight? I didn't bring that work home. And that's what we're talking about here. Having that established already. So it's not a random, I didn't bring it home tonight. You maybe set days. You maybe make sure you organize to where you are working this day. I'm going to bring some home. Or the stuff I'm going to bring home is going to be smaller. I have 5 papers I need to grade, or I have to grade this one class, or I have to look over this one thing. Try not to bring home, I have to create a lesson or a unit over this tonight. Like that. And that's the thing where you're just stuck in, because we all get that way where you're just diving in, you're reading stuff, you're looking at stuff, you're crafting things. And before you know it, you looked up and you've been doing it 2 hours. You started at 7, it's 9 o'clock. And you're like, kids, where, hey guys, what I mean? Like, cause they walked out and they saw you, but you've been in that. Try to create those strategies, those boundaries, and all of that will start to lessen your exhaustion, because you may be feeling you're doing a really good job balancing it, but then you still feel exhaustion. That's your brain telling you you're doing too much, right? That you're bringing too much home. You're not having those moments of, whew.
Yeah, we may think we have multitasking, figured out. And the reality is you're, the easiest person to fool is yourself comes to mind. So please don't fall into that category. Offline, you had also shared with me some tools, some resources, to help teachers with this, and maybe dig into that a little bit. There's even some new AI pieces out there that can really, really help as we get into this argument of whether to lean into AI, whether not to, but maybe share some of those resources for teachers, that can be a benefit in creating a little bit of balance.
Yeah, let's look into some of the things that give you that good feedback, but make your life a little easier. So something like you said, the new tech, all right? Some things out there can do this for us. There's a couple sites, especially, and right now I'm speaking to a lot of the teachers who have a lot of writing stuff, because that's usually, if you're grading a quick little worksheet, you could do 3 classes in 20 minutes. You got a key, boom, 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 boom. You got it, right? But if you're somebody who does a lot of writing in class or has students read and then write something and then you got to read it and feedback, one of them is classcompanion.com. Okay, so you can set up a prompt in there and then they literally answer the prompt and it has an AI system read it based on what you said the answer should be. Read it, and then it actually gives them your feedback. You don't have to type the feedback. The AI reads what your answer was, your ideal answer that you typed in. So you're doing this all on the front end, the planning side. They get the prompt, they log on, they type in their answer, and then the AI, you can give them 3 times to do it. And the AI goes, after the first time, goes, you're on the right track. Now think of adding this. And then they have to answer it again, and they add in that factor, readjust their answer to do. The AI says, great, you're doing good there. You should also think of this to really wrap it up. And they add that in, and boom, they got a good answer. Now think of that from the other side, not using a system like that. They write it, they turn it in, you read it. You either, they turn in digitally, you're typing in a little comment box for every single student, by the way. You need to add this. You send it back. They write it, you read it, then you send back that other feedback. This is a back and forth, and now you're grading the same thing 3 times where this system does it for you, and the thing you finally grade has already had meaningful feedback based on your criterion, and the student has adjusted it, so you're reading that product. And then if there's something else needed, you can comment on a way to go deeper after it's already been dug deeper. So you are cutting out 2 to 3 back and forth on the same assignment using this. And that's such a time saver.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that another one to just create things. Again, I think, AI will probably, I'm assuming, we'll probably maybe do an arc over AI because I think it's so important. But, just talking about this, I think AI, when you're using it the right way, is good. Another one's built for teachers called magicschool.ai. And basically, if you go to magicschool.ai, and again, that first one was classcompanion.com. If you go to magicschool.ai, it has a whole suite of things that you can create using this, putting in prompts. It can create quick worksheets. You can put a PowerPoint in and ask it to create a fill-in-the-blank note sheet from that if you don't want your kids to have to write a lot, so you want to go over the PowerPoint quickly. I do that all the time just to make sure my kids can do it quickly instead of because the worst thing is you're talking and you're ready to move on and that one kid's like, could you go back? And then you're just staring at the class awkwardly, while the one kid's writing. Try not to make them feel weird, so you're trying to riff and fill in real quick, but taking your PowerPoint, turn it into a Word document, deleting words for them to fill in the blank, that could take 30 minutes on a decent sized PowerPoint. 4 seconds does it. You can create, like I said, worksheets. It can create units. It can create text-based prompts off a topic you want to do. It has a whole suite of things. For administrators listening, even as professional development generators, to where you can put in when you want to work and it can create a script. So magicschool.ai is a way to lessen this time. Please, teachers, I'm going to tell you this right now. Using these tools is not cheating on your end. It is not being lazy. What it is maximizing your time and getting a good thing. I know so many teachers are afraid to use this because they're like, well, then am I really a teacher if I didn't craft this from scratch? Yes, you are. You're going to review it. I'm not saying hit go, print, and don't ever look at it. You're just make sure it's your level of rigor and quality. But instead of taking an hour to think design, you typed in the prompt, you asked it what to do, and 15 seconds later, you have a thing you can review and possibly have.
These tools are helping educators meet the intense needs of the job. So I do like that you address that. We should not feel shame, guilt for utilizing resources and tools that are simply helping us keep up for the most part. I mean, not even so much getting ahead. It's great if you're able to enter that space of the race, but it's really just helping us keep up. So no longer we're going to feel shamed or any kind of guilt or embarrassment or less than if we're leveraging, these kind of things.
Absolutely. And I just think these are just a couple. There's so many out there, but it's way easier to do it that way. Play around with them. And again, nobody's saying stop doing it your old way. You start to utilize these tools. Look at it. You start small. If you make bell work every day, instead of crafting those questions that has a question generator, maybe type that in and save yourself those 20 minutes of making your bell work. And you can put those in there. Those little steps we're taking to lessen that exhaustion. How happy are you going to be? And your spouse is going to be, and your children are going to be when normally you come in and be like, okay, I just have to grade these papers and make my bell work, guys, and then I'm yours. And that's normally, let's say, a 45-minute to an hour practice. And they're like, okay, and that's their standard thing. How happy are all of you going to be when you say that? And if you're able to find a tool like this or find a strategy like this, 15 minutes later, you're like, all right, let's go on a walk. Or, hey, let's hang out. Let's go outside and throw the ball around. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, cool. They're going to be so excited that they've kind of put in their mind this thing. And guess what? You've gotten the same thing done you used to. You got bell work. You reviewed it. It's high quality. It's to your standards. And you've given yourself 45 minutes of your life back that they didn't expect. That lessens exhaustion. That makes your family feel better. That makes you go into work the next day with a smile on your face instead of feeling guilty of, gosh, I worked longer and I needed to. I barely got to hang out with my kids. You're less exhausted.
And that kind of feels like a great place to sort of land that plane there. We've given them some practical tools, resources, strategies, tips. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to be able to say, I've given my best at work. I've been present at home. I'm living a balanced life. Easier said than done. Remember that progress equals happiness. None of this gets figured out overnight. Lean into the journey, into the process of creating a structure, a system that can benefit you at home as much as at work. Remember, there's no shame in putting a little bit of work into how to make your home life run smoother so that you're not overwhelmed, overburdened by work at school seeping into all other aspects of your life. Man, I'm really proud of the conversation that we've had today, Doc. I think this is not only healthy, but pushes things forward in terms of giving people some resources and tools. Do want to remind our listeners, man, to jump into our mailbox episodes. Want that radical candor. Man, tell us what you think. Tell us what's wrong, what you didn't like about some of the conversation points that we have. But this is a place for you to info dump. Let us hear it. If your spouse doesn't want any more of it, man, your siblings or your friend groups are tired of hearing about that, put it in the mailbox episode. Let's go. We want to hear from you. Great conversation today, man. I've absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I think it's been great, and I really appreciate it, and I've had a lot of fun. And again, let us know. I don't want to type up a whole email. We're on X at EDU Warfare. Use the hashtag Educational Warfare, and just comment on us. Quick ones, small ones. If you have ideas, strategy, that'd be great to hear. Just a little what we're going to do next. So like Dr. Jackson said, next Tuesday, be a mailbag episode. So while you're listening to this, think of stuff, send us stuff in. We'll do that. We'll talk to you and make you a part of this fight. And then after that, the following Tuesday after the mailbag, we'll have our third and final episode in this arc with Exhaustion, the War Within. My friends, the war at home with exhaustion is going to rage on. It's never going to stop. We can lessen it. We can cut it down. And that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you so much for listening, Ryan. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it, man.
Oh, absolutely, man. Great conversation. Love it. Want to, again, encourage our listeners. embrace the platform, the podcast, dive into our mailbag episode. We want to hear from you. The spicier, the better. Come on, get this stuff off your chest. You're dealing with a current teacher. You're dealing with a former principal, former English teacher. We're both knee deep into all aspects of education. So we want to hear from you directly. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for checking out the podcast.
Yes, and make sure to, share, follow the podcast, give us a rating, give us a review on whatever platform you listen to, and tell your friends about it. That way we can all start to have this conversation. So for Dr. Jackson, I again want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your awesome comments from the last mailbag, and I hope to hear from you soon. And thank you for being a part of the fight.